Thank you for joining us on CBS News 24/7. I'm Tom Hansen. We've been watching a special report of President Trump speaking alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The president speaking just shy of 30 minutes at this afternoon press conference. Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking for just about 20 minutes. There were no questions, of course. Now, the president called it a very good meeting and said peace was not just possible in just Gaza, but all of the Middle East. And I want to get more context on this. Let's bring in CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe for more. So, Ed, I want to get your first takes on this high-stakes press conference. What came of the White House meeting? And if Hamas hasn't agreed to this plan, how significant is this all for the trajectory of the war in Gaza?
Well, it's a good question, Tom. We're waiting to hear whether Hamas would agree to this and how quickly they may do so. But the president announcing that this 20-point plan, a comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict, has now been accepted by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who said he does. But there are several, if not dozens, of potential sticking points, sticky wickets in this proposal that could just continue to prolong this process. And if you excuse the crowd here behind us, we're anticipating the Israeli Prime Minister may leave at any moment as we're talking here. Among the topics discussed in this 20-point plan, the idea that Gaza will be, quote, de-radicalized, terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors, that it will be, quote, redeveloped for the benefit of the people of Gaza who have suffered more than enough, that if both sides agree to this proposal, the war will immediately end. Israeli forces would withdraw to the agreed-upon line to prepare for a hostage release. All military operations, including aerial and arterial bombardment, will be suspended. You see that map there. This is a White House-provided map of how Israeli forces would withdraw over the course of the agreement happening back towards Israeli borders and out of the Gaza Strip. But again, this is a White House-proposed withdrawal map here that's part of this 20-point plan. Hostages would be returned, and Israel would release 250 life sentence prisoners plus 1,700 Gazans who were detained after October 7, 2023. Once all hostages are returned, Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence and to decommission their weapons will be given amnesty. Members of Hamas who wish to leave Gaza will be provided safe passage to receiving countries. Just in the first 6 points, there's a lot there to be debated and wondered about. And then just that alone could potentially hold things up. The president suggesting that he will lead a commission, a new board of peace that would include, among other people, current and former heads of state, like the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, head of government. The body would set the framework and handle the funding for the redevelopment of Gaza until such time as a new Palestinian Authority has completed its reform program. So we'll see if Hamas agrees to this, but it is a pretty comprehensive and detailed plan, and yet there are so many more details to be sorted out between Israeli and Hamas leadership that one wonders how successfully this could proceed. It comes, however, after a week of diplomacy by the president and his team with predominantly Arab and Muslim nations leaders who are pushing this White House to help resolve this, and made very clear, among other things, that there would have to be some allowance for a leadership structure established by those in the Gaza Strip. There were demands that the United States ensure that Israel never occupies the West Bank, but there's nothing in this document regarding that, just that it won't occupy Gaza, and a real hope across the region that there will eventually be peace and economic prosperity, but it's still a long way away.
That is no doubt the case, Ed, and so many questions still yet to be answered, including, like you said, will Hamas agree? What's the timeline of any formal presentation to Hamas? How realistic are the terms of this proposal, the execution of the proposal, and who's on this board of peace, which we'll find out in the coming days, presumably. Based on what we heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu, do the U.S. and Israel appear to be on the same page over the next steps for the war in Gaza and the withdrawal?
I don't think we heard enough to know that for certain, Tom. They didn't take questions, and that's part of the reason why, because you could have immediately exposed some differences in the details here. But the White House will be pleased that the Prime Minister is going back to his country, having agreed in principle to this. And then the issue will be the follow-through and making sure that the two sides start talking if indeed Hamas agrees to this. And the president is just very eager to ensure that everything appears to be moving towards some kind of peaceful resolution, and that the other things that have been negotiated around this, like the Abraham Accords that he mentioned, that broad historic agreement between Arab countries and Israel, is able to be sustained, if not expanded upon, in the coming years. But that can only happen if this issue is resolved. So we'll see. Again, the big step next is, does Hamas even take a look at this and consider it and accept it? And then, if so, how are those talks conducted? Who runs them? And to what extent does this White House really want to be involved in those details at a time when there are several other big challenges facing the White House, including domestic ones, like whether or not there's going to be a shutdown of the federal government beginning Wednesday morning?
Yeah, speaking of that, that is the other big meeting happening today. But the president doesn't appear optimistic that a deal will be reached to avoid a government shutdown. So what is the president's position on talking with Democrats ahead of tomorrow's shutdown deadline? And what is he trying to achieve there?
Well, he's happy to talk to them, and that the 5 leaders, the 4 from Capitol Hill and the president, are meeting at all is always seen as an encouraging sign as the hours tick down towards a deadline. But Republicans, united, have been pretty clear with Democratic leaders. You have to accept this extension that we've already passed in the House of 7 weeks of federal funding at the current levels. And then later in the fall, we can have negotiations over some policy differences that get us to either a full year's worth of spending agreement or just a continuation of the norm. But what Democrats are pushing for is an extension of some key tax cuts and credits that are given to people that use the Affordable Care Act. They're set to expire at the end of the year. Costs would go up for health care for many Americans if that happens. Democrats warning this is a real political problem for Republicans if they allow them to expire. There are Republicans in competitive races next year who concede that, want to see some kind of negotiation. The Speaker, the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, have said that's not something that should be negotiated right now. It can be negotiated maybe 7 weeks from now once funding has been extended. We'll see if the president holds and agrees with those Republican leaders or starts to open the door a little bit to some kind of negotiation. There's also a possibility that Democrats may come to them with some kind of counterproposal that says, hey, let's reopen the government for a week, maybe 10 days. There's some reports that that's what Leader Schumer of the Democrats is now pushing. What would that accomplish other than kick this just a little further into October is unclear. But prepare yourself, viewer and Americans, for several weeks now of stalemate between the two parties over some basic spending issues and the future of health care in this country.
Yeah, we are all bracing for that. The White House news cycle moving at warp speed today. Ed O'Keefe, thanks for staying on top of all things coming out of the nation's capital. We appreciate it.